many of your friends and congregants who have contributed to this fund. Jack Warnick, very strategically, is our latest Lamed Vav member, and thank you, Jack. That was good timing. This is our new rabbi, Rabbi Gorbin. She is going to introduce Angela.
So it's very funny for me to be up here to introduce Rabbi Buchdahl because she grew up in this congregation and I've been here for 4 months. But for those of you who are not familiar with her, Rabbi Buchdahl is the senior rabbi of Central Synagogue in New York. And that is after serving as its senior cantor since 2006. Rabbi Buchdahl was invested as a cantor in 1999 and ordained as a rabbi in 2001. And she was also a Wexner Graduate Fellow, which means that she's one of the best because that's who Wexner supports, and is the first Asian American to be ordained as a cantor or rabbi in North America. But it's really wonderful, I know, for many of you to have someone who grew up in this congregation and found their way into incredible leadership in American Judaism to be back home to share some words with us. So thank you all for being here.
Well, it's so nice to be back and to see many familiar faces and to see also new people who were here. I had the privilege of being here on Friday night for services, and it was really nice to see a lot of young people in the crowd. And I also felt like everyone was really singing, which is such a great thing. As a cantor, I don't take that for granted, and it's really a testament to your leadership. I think you are all in very good hands with your cantor and rabbi, and I hope you will be very good to them because it's not an easy job, but it's such a critically important one. And so anyway, happy to be here. I wanted to start with just a little bit of setting the Torah portion, where we just were and where we're going as a frame for talking a little bit about some of the things that I learned about Judaism from growing up at Temple Bethel. So just yesterday, we read from Parshat Noach, which is the Torah portion which has the very famous story of Noah and the ark and the flood. But the end of the portion has the slightly less famous story of the Tower of Babel. So long ago it says that the entire earth spoke in Safa Echat Udvarim Achadim, which is one language and one unified way of doing things. So just imagine that everyone basically kind of thought the same, spoke the same, had one culture. It sounds like it would be the ultimate in cohesion and cooperation, like the opposite of the way things feel today. But with that unity, what the people did was they colluded to build a tower with its top to the sky so they could make a name for themselves. Now, God does not like this and thought we got a little bit too big for our britches and decides to confuse our language and scatter us across all 4 corners of the earth. And no longer would we be just one people with one language and only one way of seeing the world. So now, in this story, with all of these new viewpoints and this babble of language, it was seen as like it was a punishment. But I want to actually say that I think the fact that we now all speak different languages and think differently about the world is not a punishment. It was actually what God intended all along. And the reason why I'm going to say my proof text for this is the next Torah portion, which is the one we're in now, which is Lech Lecha, which begins today. So we're in the third Torah portion. So if you consider that the first Torah portion is the story of creation, it's the origin story of the entire world. The second Torah portion is Noach, or the Tower of Babel, and this is the origin story of different languages and human cultures. And now we're in the third Torah portion, Lech Lecha, which is the origin story of the Jewish people. So here we are. We've got the portion is, as I said, is Lech Lecha, and God calls Abraham and says, Lech Lecha me'artzecha mimoladetcha umibeit avicha. So, go forth from your land, from your birthplace, from your father's house, to a place that I will show you, and I will make your name great, and I will make you a blessing. Now, we always think of that, probably when we hear those words, we think of that beautiful song by Debbie Friedman, Lechi Lach, right? And it sounds like going off and being a blessing is such a sweet and rosy thing. But I want you to think for just a moment how hard and difficult and challenging it was to do that. He had to leave everything behind, his family, his birthplace, and go to a place where he had to become a complete stranger. So I know a little bit about how hard this was because this is something that my mother had to do. She left her birthplace and her homeland and her parents' house to come to a land that was unknown to her. Now, she did have my father and a loving, extended Warnick family when she arrived, and she had us kids running around underfoot. But I think it was still extremely hard to do and to start all over and to learn a new language and to have to adjust to a new culture. So imagine now that this was something that God made Abraham and Sarah do in order to become the Jewish people. So when Abraham and Sarah cross over the river Euphrates, that boundary of the river makes them no longer residents of a homeland, but it makes them strangers. And that crossing over in Hebrew is ya'avor, and that's where we get the Hebrew word ivri, which means to cross over. So literally our name, the Hebrews, or ivrim, literally means we are boundary crossers. We are the people who cross over. So think about that for a moment and what that means about the origin of the Jewish people and why that matters. God wouldn't let Abraham and Sarah start Judaism or start being Jews from the safety and comfort of their homeland. He needed them to become the other. So I want you to think for a moment, and this is not just a rhetorical question, why do you think the origin of the Jewish people was with us needing to become strangers? Yeah. Growth. What way? What happens when you, like, give me some sense of, like, what kind of growth you have when you feel like you're the other or the stranger?
When you're in a different land, living in a different country, you have to learn their customs, you have to learn their language, you have to be respectful. When I lived in Germany for 3 years, it was very strange at first being a Jew in Germany.
I'm sure it was.
I really had to, it was a teeny little town, and I had to just learn to be respectful that I was a visitor in their country. And I had to kind of learn their ways.
Beautiful. So I can't imagine how much growth, and you probably remember those times in a very vivid way. So yeah, when you go to a place that's completely different and you have to be a stranger, there's a tremendous amount of growth. What else happens when you're, or what else is possible if you feel like you become the stranger? Why else would it maybe be important? Yeah, Mel. Empathy. Okay, great. I just learned about Mel that she went to college in Korea. So I have a lot of questions for her. But think about what it is to, thanks for the microphone. Think about what it means to, like, if you know what it's like to feel like you're the stranger, then you're going to have a lot of empathy for someone else who feels like the other. And that's actually been part of the Jewish experience as well. Any other thoughts? Yeah. Beautiful. So in some ways, it makes us feel different, and different can feel like it's bad, but different also means unique, special, chosen, right? And so I think that one of the things that I'm going to get back to the Tower of Babel story to say, I don't think it was a punishment that we all had to be different. In fact, I think it would have been a punishment if we were all exactly the same, because if you all think and speak the same, then actually you don't feel any sense of what makes you unique, special, particular, or with a particular mission. So in some ways, I think it was always God's plan to make us scattered and different languages. And in fact, the reinforcement of that is the fact that in order to become Jews, we had to actually feel like we were really different than everybody else. We had to understand ourselves as the other, to create empathy, to create growth. In many ways, being a stranger is the greatest teacher we can have.
Forces you to
Beautiful. It forces you to identify and define yourself. And nothing is stronger for that than when you go to a place that's different, right? So my son, Eli, went to Korea for 3 months in a gap semester during the pandemic. And he grew up with, in Jewish New York, going to a Jewish day school with all Jewish friends and a rabbi for a mother. So he basically didn't have friends who weren't Jewish. It's very different than growing up in Tacoma. He grew up where his entire world was this Jewish bubble. And he lived on a Jewish calendar. He got like second day Sukkot off from school. Who knew that was a holiday from school? Okay, so, that was his world. Korea was the first time he was in a world where he was very, very different. And he said, first of all, everybody stared at me everywhere I went. He said, and he said that when he was there, he went to Chabad and for high holiday services because Chabad is everywhere, including Seoul. And when he was at Chabad, he told me afterward, he said, Mom, I feel a little embarrassed, but I lied to the Chabad rabbi. I said, why did you lie? He said, well, I told him that I was there and he started asking questions about my family because he figured out that I had family in Korea. And you guys know that in Chabad mindset or in halakhic Judaism, your Judaism is traced through your mother's line, not your father's line. So he didn't want any questions. So he said, so I told him that, I said that my mother's mother was Jewish and my mother's father was Korean, so that there wouldn't be any question. Okay, so anyway, and then, wait, no, it gets worse. And then my husband piped up and he said, why didn't you just tell him that your mom is a rabbi? And he goes, oh no, I can't do that, because then he would look you up and then he would definitely know you're not Jewish. And I was like, you mean the Chabad, if you tell the Chabad rabbi that your mom is a rabbi, then he'll figure out you're not Jewish? I was like, this is really messed up. But anyway, I was really surprised that he did that because he's not a kid who's ever been insecure in his Jewish identity. And here he was at Chabad wanting and caring that the Chabad rabbi would not question whether or not he was really Jewish or not. And I thought to myself, it was the first time that he had to define himself differently, and he was in a place where he was completely a stranger, and his lifeline was, I know I'm a Jew. And so in some ways, in that moment, he felt so vulnerable, feeling that even the one lifeline of sameness, of sharedness with the Jewish rabbi would be called into question. And so it was very interesting to me that was the one place where he would say that. But anyway, difference in identity is very important. I grew up always defining myself as a Jew in Tacoma because I always felt different for it, but I also felt special for it. Was there another hand over here? Okay. So I think that that's an essential element, an existential state of what it is to be a Jew, is that you really need to actually know what it is to be a stranger. And I think that we certainly had a lot of practice with that growing up in Tacoma. Now, a lot of times, we think of being the other as something that's very negative. And I guess part of what I want to suggest is that being the stranger or being the other is actually really can be a very positive attribute. And I think is part of what has shaped us as Jews throughout the centuries for 2,000 years. So I wanted to share just a few thoughts about some of the ways that that I was shaped by growing up at Temple Bethel in Tacoma. One of the first things that I learned is just the power of a community that really takes care of each other. I'll share that it was really a very powerful feeling to come from Korea and move here when I was 5 years old, and our first apartment building was literally across the street from the synagogue. And so I'd walk here with my dad, and in some ways, I felt completely out of sorts because I was barely learning English, and now I was walking into a service that we were speaking Hebrew, which I definitely didn't know. And yet, it was very clear that when we walked in here, that my father and having my family here and my grandmother and generations and cousins, that I felt like we were walking into a place where I had deep roots, and that made such a difference. I love the fact that there were many, many relationships that were multi-generational, that my grandmother was friends with the Seinfelds, the elder Seinfelds, and then my dad was friends with the next generation, with Denny and Karen, and then we knew their kids, and that was like multiple generations like that with many, many families. And that was a very deep sense of like rootedness at a time where I was feeling very unrooted. I remember the story that when our family business was in trouble many years ago, and my Uncle Al and my Uncle Jack were running the business at the time, that when there was trouble in the family business, that it was families at the synagogue that came together and helped guarantee and make sure that the business got back up on its feet. And I thought, well, that is a really powerful community that does that for each other. I remember that I came here with very lucky timing, because I came in 1970. You made a garbage truck? That's amazing. So I see it. So when I came in 1976, it was just at a time when the Reform movement were making some radical changes to the movement. It was only a year later, I think, that Rabbi Alexander Schindler of blessed memory, who was the president of the Reform movement, gave a speech at the biennial about outreach. It was extremely controversial. So think about this in like the late 70s, and there had just been a study that came out that said that intermarriage was at a shocking 30%, and the Jewish world was up in arms, and most of them, the conservative movement, which was the larger movement at the time, said what we need to do is build the walls higher. And the Reform movement actually took what was, I think, a prophetic and visionary and courageous and also risky stand to say, no, actually what we need to do is throw our arms open to interfaith families. And we need to not shun them. And if there are non-Jews that are willing to come into a synagogue, we need to welcome them. We need to let them stand on our bima and be a part of our ceremonies. We need to include them. So this was all happening. And by the way, they also said we're going to accept patrilineal descent, which means Jews like me with a non-Jewish mother but a Jewish father would be considered Jews without question. So imagine if I had come here a decade earlier, I don't think that I would have been able to be a Jew. I really mean that. I came at exactly the right time. So I came right when, and I think Rabbi Rosenthal, who was the kind of person, would have probably embraced my mother anyway, but we were coming at a time when the entire movement was shifting its attitudes about families like ours. And so my mother was embraced, my father was not shunned, my mom was on the bima for my bat mitzvah and my sister's bat mitzvah, and we were welcomed as full Jews, full stop. Now that made all the difference in the world, but I will tell you that that change was very hard for a lot of people. There were a lot of people who said, well, Judaism's not gonna look the same. Guess what, they're right. I don't look the same. Judaism does not look the same, but if we are not able to embrace the change that needs to happen with a Judaism that needs to respond to the moment that we're in, then we are going to die. And I think that we have to remember that in every generation, Judaism has continued to reform. That is what reform means, by the way. It's not just a name. It's actually a verb. We have to reform Judaism. That is what Reform Judaism is all about. And it's not past tense. We're not reformed. We didn't just fix it in one spot and then leave it. We are reforming it. And so I think that was really powerful. I think about the fact that I was born in 1972, which is the year that the first female rabbi was ordained. Think about that. I never had to spend a day of my life imagining that there couldn't be a rabbi that could be a woman. And so I think about all of those kinds of like lucky things. My parents were married only a year after Loving versus Virginia was passed, which meant that interracial marriage were not illegal in some states in this country. And my parents were only married a year after that. So, change. To me, this is all progress. But there were plenty of people in America and plenty of Jews in our country who thought that this was highly problematic. And so I think that remembering that I think that change and reforming Judaism is deeply important is one of the messages that I learned. And Rabbi Rosenthal, who grew up, in an old country, he embraced this in such an incredible way and never made me or my family feel like sort of second class in the congregation. And by the way, the community, I would also say, made us feel that way. I think that one of the things I learned was it's really important, it was really powerful to grow up in a community where everyone basically had to have a job. And it's still that way here. You've got, people who are volunteering to lead with tech and with security and with setting up special programs. And, I work in a place now that's highly, highly professionalized. There are benefits to that you can you can pay someone to do the job, but it doesn't have the same feeling. And I have to say that when I grew up and I look around, and even on Friday night and tonight, I have at least a half dozen of you who were my religious school teachers that are still here. And I can't tell you what it was like to grow up with people who chose to do this, to serve back to their community in this way, and the way we felt playing with their kids and growing up with each other, and the sense that all of us, that this community would only happen if we all gave what we could give to the community and give back. That was very, very powerful for me. And then I learned it as a kid as well, that I had to do what I had to do. So I'll just share one story that I've shared with Joan Garden before, but it was a pivotal one in my life, which is that at some point there was this song leader that kind of came in and sort of swept through Tacoma, kind of Mary Poppins style, and started a kids choir. I don't know if you guys remember Ruthie. She was really amazing. So Ruthie came in, she was young and very energetic, and she started a kids choir, and she taught me Debbie Friedman for the first time, and I was singing to God, and I loved it so much, and my sister and I would stay late, and then she recorded a cassette tape with us, which was made us feel like rock stars. We went into a real studio, and then we sold the cassettes to the congregation, and every once in a while we got to sing on the bema on a Friday night. And that was the first time when I was singing in Ruthie's choir that I really felt like I had a voice in the congregation. I was probably about 10 years old. Ruthie was amazing. She was here for about 3 years, and then she sort of disappeared kind of as mysteriously as she arrived. I don't even know where she went. I've been trying to track her down for the last 40 years. I don't know her last name. I was hoping Joan knew, but she didn't remember. But I think after that, I started bugging Joan. I said, who was our religious school director. I said, Joan, we need to have a music teacher. Now that Ruthie's gone, we have to have a music teacher. And Joan said, well, they don't grow on trees in Tacoma. We can't find a music teacher to do this. And so I think I bugged her for 2 or 3 years until finally I was 14. And Joan said, you know what? You can be our music teacher. She said, I'm going to send you to Camp Swig. I'm going to get you a guitar. You're going to learn as much Jewish music as you can in 8 weeks. We'll pay for it. And then you come back and you'll be our Sunday school teacher for music. And that's what I did. And so it was, again, the spirit of Tacoma, maybe we don't have it, we've got to do it. And so I was a very bad music teacher when I was 14. I had the orange songster open, and I was playing like this with the guitar chords and changing them very slowly. But over the years, I got a little bit better, and by the time I graduated, I was song leading at Camp Swig myself, and it really sort of set the path for me becoming a cantor and a rabbi. But a lot of this was just, if you want to see it happen in a community like this, make it happen. And Joan taught me that, and it really set me on my way. So I want to thank you for that. Yeah. And for me also, it was about being the representative, feeling different. So I went to Stadium High School. I'm a proud Stadium graduate, almost all the Warnicks. There are a few of you that didn't, but that's okay. But I remember that Stadium High School put their student body elections on Yom Kippur, and I fought with the principal to move them off of Yom Kippur, which he did, and then I became class president, so I was very happy about that. But I remember that it was a very important thing that I really felt as one of only 4 Jews at Stadium High School, that if I wasn't going to be the Jewish representative, then nobody would be, and that I felt like the fate of Judaism rested on my shoulders in this crazy way. And I think that many Jews who grow up in small Jewish communities feel that way. I married someone who grew up in a tiny Jewish community in Vermont, and he too felt like he was responsible for Judaism. It's a very different thing when you grow up in New York. My kids, on the whole, I don't mean just my children, I mean my kids at Central, they just take it for granted, and they kind of don't necessarily, they kind of feel like, there's so many Jews that are in their schools that don't do anything, that don't belong to a synagogue, that don't become bar bat mitzvah, that don't go to Jewish camps, don't visit Israel. And I kind of think to myself, do you understand what you have, that you have no understanding of this inheritance you are a part of? So it was really powerful to feel like I had that sense of responsibility. And I think that made me a much stronger Jew growing up in a smaller community like this, because I felt like it was on me. I also love the fact that, like, since my sister and I were often the ones that were alternately put up to, like, light the menorah at the Christmas assembly at Stadium or whatever else we had to do, that we were like, Jews, people in Tacoma just thought Jews looked like me and Gina. So, you know, which now we do. So I think I wanted to also just name and thank my Uncle Jack and my Aunt Lily of blessed memory, because I think about the fact that I have such a very, very strong relationship with Israel. And it's a funny thing to have that kind of a relationship when you grow up in Tacoma. It's not an easy thing to cultivate. But I think about the fact that my Uncle Jack started a sister city program with Kiryat Motzkin. And because of that, we hosted Israelis in our home every year when they came and visited, like, Israeli scouts, and I would hang out with them. And so just to make it real, to have Israelis that were that we got to know. And then it was my Aunt Lily who clipped a little ad in the Hadassah magazine that said, apply for Bronfman, it's a free trip to Israel. And so she handed that to me, and that Bronfman trip sort of changed the trajectory of my life. And so and then of course my first cousin Todd made Aliyah to Israel, and he is a cousin that I see every time I go back to Israel now, and we're very close. And I think that it makes such a big difference to just feel, even in ways before you get to visit, that you feel that you have some sort of connection. Israel has always been a very important part of my own Jewish identity and outlook on the world. I think it's powerful that we can do that even from so far away. Let's see. I think that the last thing I would just say that I loved is, I love that I think about my bat mitzvah here, which was I thought it was so fancy because my parents got a swan ice sculpture for it. I was like, that was like kind of that was the epitome of, like, I don't know, fanciness. But anyway, but what I loved is that there was a sense that you didn't have to even send out the invites. It was just a given that the community kind of showed up, and that also people provided. I think that we had, like, Mrs. Baskin made her little mini cheesecakes for me, and Joy made her fudge, and and everyone kind of chipped in, and it was a very sense of, like, really, like, we're all kind of taking care of each other in that way. And that's a really powerful thing. That, to me, is what religious community is all about. These are the lessons that I learned growing up in a community like this, and I really still think that these are the powerful things that keep small communities strong and vibrant, especially in a time where, I know that there can be ways that you could say, oh, but we can tune into this, or we can get Judaism from this and this, because it's a bigger, global, interconnected world. But you can't get Joy's fudge if you don't have a small community that takes care of each other. It just doesn't mean that, but, like, it's the ways that you actually feel that you're known when you walk into a room, and that you have some shared history, and that you care about the future that you're going to be building together. So I think that, just kind of to wrap this up again, to say that I think I see my life as one of being a boundary crosser. I came here as an immigrant and crossed over to a new country. I felt like I was in some ways a boundary crosser within my own Jewish community. I think becoming a female rabbi was its own boundary crossing for me as well. And it used to be that I spent a lot of my life feeling like I was an outsider even within the Jewish community at times, and it was hard for me. Not necessarily at Temple Bethel, but anytime I left the bubble of Temple Bethel, I felt in the Jewish world a little bit like I was an outsider. And it took me a very long time to figure out that maybe that was the most Jewish thing about me. That actually feeling like you are the other or the stranger is a very, very important part of what it is to be a Jew. And not to stay there, but part of what it is to be the other is to create empathy and growth and definition and mission. And at the same time, the goal is not to stay the other. Remember what Abraham ultimately does? He has to leave his home to find his homeland, right? He eventually ends up in Israel. So ultimately, our goal is not to remain the other, but to find home. And I was very, very grateful that Temple Bethel and Tacoma was truly like a Jewish home for me, and that I found homes wherever I ended up, which is why I could end up becoming a rabbi. And it is very strange to me that my home now is New York City in a very large synagogue that couldn't be more different in some ways than Temple Bethel, but somehow also feels like a home. And so that is my wish and my blessing for all of you, that you both understand the heart and the soul of what it is to be a stranger, because that is what it is to be a Jew, but you also find your way to home, to a place where you know that you will be accepted and loved, and you will find your people. So before I go to questions, I want to actually end by just singing one thing, which, hold on. Which might be pretty predictable given the Torah portion that I just said we're in, but it feels like a fitting song for us in this moment. And I think you know it, so if you'll join with me, I think that would be wonderful. Lechi lach to a land that I will show you. Lech lecha to a place you do not know. Lechi lach, on your journey I will bless you, and you shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing, and you shall be a blessing. Lechi lach, lechi lach, and I shall make your name great. Lech lecha, and all shall praise your name. Lechi lach, to the place that I will show you. L'simchat chayim, l'simchat chayim, l'simchat chayim, lechi lach. And you shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing, and you shall be a blessing. Lechi lach. Thank you. So we have a little time, and I'd love to take questions for 15 or 20 minutes, and then we'll go to dessert. But anything about, I don't know, anything you want to ask, I'm here. One second, I think we have a microphone, and we'll come over to you.
Hi. I was watching your services. I streamed them for the holidays, and you did something that I hadn't seen in the temple I grew up with or here. You brought the Torahs in from somewhere else, I think it was Yom Kippur, to return to the Ark. And I never heard of that. Where did you move them to, and what was the tradition that you moved them back to the Ark for the service? That was new to me.
Okay, that's a great question. So this is part of the effort to continually reform Judaism. That is not a tradition that is like an old tradition. But what we did was we took a look at the Kol Nidre service, and we decided we wanted to rethink the whole service. We spent over a year kind of doing it with someone else who helped us as a liturgy consultant. And essentially, if you know, traditionally you're supposed to sing Kol Nidre 3 times. And we thought about that, and we thought instead of doing it 3 times in a row, we would do it 3 times broken up in the service and build to it. And then we also thought about the fact that the words of Kol Nidre are about annulling all your vows. And if you actually think about the words literally, they're probably not even a sentiment that we all want to say. We don't want to say, whatever promise I made to you, I'm not beholden to him anymore. So it's a text from a particular time. So we actually started asking the question, what do people really think about when they sing Kol Nidre? And we thought about the fact that people really actually think about memory. Like when you hear Kol Nidre, it's about memory. And when you hear Kol Nidre, it's about bearing your soul in some way, recognizing that you're in this time of Yom Kippur and you're bearing your soul. And the third, we think, thing was about return, like the idea of tshuva and returning. So what we did was with each of the 3 Kol Nidre renditions we did, we actually had a kavanah, like a reading intention that set up the idea of memory the first time, then set up the idea of bearing our souls the second time, and then set up the idea of tshuva and return the third time. And for that third time, we literally wanted to physicalize the idea of return, so we took the Torahs out of the ark, we have them waiting in the back, and we have people who have honors to like return the Torahs back to the ark, just as we're able to return. And so that was just sort of this physicalized symbol of that particular theme. But part of the reason why I took the time to explain this is that, like, part of the joy of being a rabbi is trying to take liturgy that's really ancient and try to make it relevant for people still today. I'm not sure we always get it right, but that is the effort that we're trying to make. And I know your cantor and rabbi try to do that as well. Like, we all think about how do we make an ancient prayer still speak to us today, and that's the goal. There was a question over here. Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. No.
Can you hear? Is this? All right. One of your favorite sermons that I've heard is about inviting God back into the garden. And I've also seen you give it to Central Synagogue and also an interfaith convention, for lack of a better word. You also did it to Christians, and I'm just wondering like how that was received from Jews versus people of other faiths, and what that was like.
Okay, so I gave a sermon about 5 or 6 years ago about God, and here's an interesting thing about God. Jews are pretty uncomfortable to talk about God, generally speaking. That's what I've learned. And so, and by the way, interestingly, we did a survey at Central Synagogue of like what people want to hear about at their high holiday sermons. God was at the bottom of the list. And I'm not joking. It was literally like all these other things and then God. And so, but there were things that are in many ways like God to me that people just don't want to say God, but like spirituality was higher on the list, or being a part of something bigger than yourself was up higher on the list. So I think that in many ways, part of the problem is God. We have a lot of baggage about God, and so I think that Jews have a hard time talking about it. If you ask the question, do you believe in God? There's going to be a lot of like hesitant hands in Jewish circles. But if you were to ask the question more like, has there ever been a time that you've experienced being a part of something bigger than yourself? I think every hand would go up. So part of this is about our translation of what God might be. If we think of God only as the God of a Passover Seder, who is very vengeful and who hardens Pharaoh's heart and who brings plagues down and all of that and is supernatural, well, I'm not sure I would believe in that God either if that was the only way that I could think about God. So I think that part of this is about that. And I think actually other traditions, other faith traditions, are much more comfortable talking about God than we are. But I'd like to invite us to think about it more. Good question. I know we had some questions over here. Yeah, I mean, can they speak loudly without? Oh.
I'll ask my questions at the mic. I wondered if you could comment on any generational differences you're seeing, and particularly around Israel and just
oh gosh, yeah.
other.
There are so many differences now, and I'm going to risk a lot of things. First of all, that I'm making generalizations that are not true, obviously, for everyone, and that. Okay, no more caveats. I'll just say, so what do I see? Yes, I think that a big shift, and I feel like I'm kind of in the middle here, but a big shift there is absolutely not a given that you're going to have support for Israel in generations that are like 40 and under. And in fact, not only that, but actually there's more and more of a trend for there to be just kind of a negative and defensive posture against Israel by Jews in younger generations, including rabbinic students even, and young rabbis. Sharing this off the record, but there was a rabbinic school class where they were teaching about Israel, and the teacher called Hamas a terrorist organization, which, by the way, the U.S. government calls Hamas a terrorist organization, and the class got so upset that they did not want to have the teacher come back. Okay, that to me is deeply upsetting. And that's not just a progressive class on college campus, that's a rabbinic school class, right? So there's a huge difference, I think, in terms of sort of support, especially among liberal Jews, non-Orthodox Jews on Israel. There's also just increased secularization generally also in younger Jews and Americans. If you look at reports like, who's the scholar who did Bowling Alone, and he also wrote a book about American religion, but can't remember his name right now. Thank you, Robert Putnam. Robert Putnam talked about the fact that essentially if you're under 30, the fastest, the Pew also does this, but the level of secular belief in young generations. So like the fastest growing religious group is the nuns. I don't mean Catholic nuns, I mean no religion, none. I have no religion. And that is the fastest religious group in people under 30. So there's just a general sense of distrust and non-belief in even thinking that there's a value in religious life among a younger generation. At the same time, I think that there is a sense of seeking sort of meaning and spirituality and being able to impact the world in a positive way. So part of this, to me, is a translation issue, again, of like, could we help people understand that this religion is a force for changing the world in the way that we want to see it? And I really do believe that it absolutely is, but I think that we haven't always done a good job. And I think we've also been hurt by the fact that the loudest voices in the media speaking on behalf of religion are often saying we're anti-abortion, or we are anti-LGBTQ rights. If that is who's speaking on behalf of religion, and they're basically saying God doesn't like gay people, which is, you're hearing that, and that's the loudest voice, you can understand why a younger generation would say, well, why would I want to have anything to do with religion? So I think we have to actually reclaim a religious voice that actually speaks to people and the next generation. Give this side a turn.
I'm not very good. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, my name is Rona. I just want to share some gratitude. This has just been the most moving experience for me, being here with all of you, Tacoma people. I'm here from North Seattle. I came with the Elmans, and I'm a neighborhood person from Central Synagogue. And can you hear me?
Oh, put it closer, he said.
Anyway, I just wanted to, I'm never going to probably ever ask you a question in person again. So I figured I would take the opportunity, and I tend to ask weird questions. So if the Hebrews, Ivrit, are boundary crossers, how does that relate to a country where we're all trying to maintain our boundaries? Thank you all, folks.
So I don't think that there's an easy answer to that. Let me think for a moment. I mean, I think you have a people who for 2,000 years longed to go back home, and who did not have the ability to sort of be self-determined in their own land. And they finally have had the miracle of being able to do that. Now, the thing is, the dream of a land is very different than what it actually means to be a sovereign nation and actually deal with a mixed population and people who've lived on a land and how you handle that. So what I guess I could say is that I think I am deeply engaged and supportive of Israel, even at times when I could be critical of some of the ways that I think it is maintaining some of its boundaries or drawing some of its boundary lines. And I guess what I would say is I would hope that that all of us would remain engaged in what I still think is sort of the most important sort of project of Jewish sovereignty that exists, which is the State of Israel, even as we have, I think, some serious questions about like where those lines should be and how we treat the people who are living on that land. And I really do hope that ultimately we'll figure out a way that we can make peace there. And what about our trust that God's going to take care of? I don't think we should just trust that God's going to take care of it. I think we we have to do the work. You know, it's very interesting that when Israelis started the country, and they were mostly sort of secular pioneers, it's very interesting how much they kind of wiped God out of it. In fact, I don't know if you know that Hanukkah song that we sing, Mi Amalek Vurot Yisrael Otam. Maybe you know that one. I learned it here at Temple Bethel. But that actually is, they bastardized a line that comes from the Torah, which says, "Who can retell the things that befell us?" And then it says, "In every age, God came to our aid." Well, they literally changed the Hebrew and don't say God came to our aid. They said, we're the ones who are going to save us. Like, human beings are going to be the ones that make this happen, not God. And I would just say that I think that we actually have to understand that, like, we have to be the agents of change. And if we want to see something different happen, we have to be a part of it, I think. As agents of God, sure. But I always get worried when people speak completely on behalf of God, because there are a lot of people in Israel speaking on behalf of God who I think are saying dangerous things. So, yes. Hello.
Hello. Our families only go back
Oh my gosh! I
4
didn't recognize. I
generations.
can see who was back there.
I
Yes.
got here late because I had Herman streaming this.
Oh.
So I want to go back to what you were talking about kind of the secularization. So how do you think rabbinic education will now move forward with HUC going through the change, whatever the actual change is down in Los Angeles?
So there's a lot of change happening at HUC. I'm thinking about the big changes happening on the Cincinnati campus, but I'm not sure if I know exactly what you're thinking about with LA. But I would say that one of the biggest challenges we have is there is a real pipeline problem of rabbis right now. I don't know if you know, but the numbers of rabbinic students at HUC and at JTS and at almost every rabbinic school are at record lows. I think JTS's incoming class has 6 students in it or something. HUC, when I was going to HUC, had 45 rabbis. I think the incoming class is under 20 now. So there's really an issue, not just of like, and that's a reflection also of a generation that is much less interested in religion, period. And so I think there are a lot of challenges, but you know, I don't know what I'd say about, like, I mean, the question you asked. Give me the question one more time. What the specific question? Like.
Overall, so the education is shifting away from
Ah.
like HUC to we're going to be in collaboration with the university and a Jewish studies program, and so it's a move away from having sort of a unique place to go and get rabbinic education to what will be on a college campus, which presents its own set of problems.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a certain way that many of these schools are kind of in survival mode, and so they're going to be creative about how they do things. I think that's going to take some sort of bold visioning, and not just sort of like, how do we keep our buildings alive? And I hope that people are going to have the vision to understand that they might need to sacrifice some of the campuses for a greater good or whatever it is. But I think just in general, we need to move our education away from kind of the lachrymose history of the Jews, of like an education that was heavily about Holocaust and anti-Semitism, and move to an education that is primarily about the meaning-making, the joy, the spirituality, the vibrancy of what it is to live a Jewish life, and what's powerful about it. I think that anti-Semitism and Holocaust is only, it's important. And by the way, I did not grow up at Temple Bethel with a heavy lachrymose education. I grew up with it being like joyful and fun and community building. Like that's what I learned here, and I think that needs to be more what we actually educate for. Yeah.
Maybe aren't a synagogue member. I'm not ever here. But a lot of us have a really strong Jewish identity, but then come to the synagogue and don't feel that connection that you talk about feeling when you were younger. And so how do you at Central Synagogue engage those Jews and bring them in and their kids in and the next generation?
I mean, I'm going to start by saying I don't think we've got that figured out, but we do have a pretty vibrant 20s and 30s sort of program, and part of what we're, and part of the question is like, do you let people kind of be in sort of demographic groupings that are their same, or do you want to integrate everyone in? And I think it has to be a mix, but I think that when we do programming for kind of 20s, 30s for young Jews, and by the way, at least half of our 20s, 30s who come are not members of the community. We just sort of open it up for that age group just because we recognize that a lot of people in that age group don't belong to synagogues yet. So, but part of it is we sort of begin with where their interests start. And so that means we're doing more kind of out of the box things. Like people are very into like cooking and cooking shows right now. So like getting kind of cool, hip, like chefs in and like doing like a big Shabbat dinner that they cook together. We've been really successful with like people hosting smaller Shabbat dinners in each other's homes, and we'll kind of help host that in a sense, like in the sense of like helping pay so someone's not having to pay for dinner for 30 people, but they'll host it. And just thinking about like, going to see a show together and then having a talk back afterward. And so part of it is also letting them kind of help program what they want to see happen. So I think that's a piece of it, but actually it's a really hard nut to crack. Like I'm not sure we are doing it right. And part of it is I think that synagogues in a good way are very centered around families and children and everything else. But then if you are not in that stage of life, it feels like, where do I fit in here and how do I find my way in? And I think that's a problem that we have not yet actually figured out well. I wish I had a better answer for you, but I'm glad you're here tonight. Yeah.
I hear from your father, Fred, that you were invited to Saudi Arabia during this past year. And we are just starting our interfaith group again in Tacoma, which has been really important since 9/11. We'll be meeting with the Muslims and a group of Christians and the Jews once a month. What was the content of that, whatever happened when you were invited to Saudi Arabia? What was going on?
Okay. So Saudi Arabia is definitely trying to not only sort of become more a part of all the world of nations, but also to develop better relationships with Israel and the Jewish community. And so that's very clear. So we were only the second official delegation of Jews invited to Saudi Arabia. And so I went with a group of mostly New York Jews, not that many rabbis, but a lot of communal leaders and others, and we were invited on the invitation of an imam who runs the Muslim World League. The Muslim World League is a religious organization. Think of it as like UJA on steroids, because it's for 1.5 billion people, Muslims in the world. And they run Mecca and Medina. So they run the holy sites and they run the Hajj, and so that's what this organization is. And the leader of this is a visionary leader who really wants to change relationships with the Jewish people. So among the things that this leader has done is he invited the largest and most important Muslim delegation to go to Auschwitz 2 years ago. So he brought 63 Muslim leaders to Auschwitz, including leaders from Lebanon who later were there was a fatwa issued against that leader from Lebanon for coming to Auschwitz, and so they are now political refugees in Saudi Arabia. But this gives you a sense of like what a courageous thing this leader did to go to Auschwitz with these leaders. And so he was the one who invited us, not the Crown Prince. And so although he does everything only probably with the blessing of the Crown Prince, but we did not meet the Crown Prince. But we went and we learned about Saudi culture and the changes that are happening, and I think that there's a lot of progress. I can't say that I know that much more than like what they wanted us to see, but what they wanted us to see was quite amazing. And by the way, I walked around as a woman in a dress like this. I call this my Saudi Arabia dress because I wore it because I bought this because it was like modest and it covered a lot of my body. But I did not have to cover my hair, and you saw a lot of women who were not covering their hair. And when you think about a country that 5 years ago used to have people morality police who walked around with sticks who hit women who weren't having their hair covered. Think about what a difference it is 5 years later, that you can see actually quite a few women who aren't wearing the full coverings. But I will share one story. I was, when the imam hosted us all for lunch, and you should know that he had a fully kosher lunch for us, which was not a small thing. He brought in kosher meat and a mashgiach from South Africa. So they flew in the kosher meat and the the checker person. The mashgiach is the person who makes sure that everything is kosher. So it was not a small thing for us to have fully kosher meals the entire time we were in Saudi Arabia. And he had us for this meal. We had this whole conversation, and it was really quite amazing. And then afterward, I was given the privilege of presenting a gift, which was a shofar that had silver engravings on it. And so, and by the way, he had been talking the entire time through an interpreter. So anyway, I get up there and I say some nice things about how the shofar is a symbol of our shared heritage because, Abraham, when he was supposed to sacrifice his son, Muslims believe that the son that was supposed to be sacrificed was Ishmael, who is considered the father of the Muslim people. And we, of course, consider that the son that was almost sacrificed was Isaac, the father of the Jewish people. But the ram and the thicket and the horn, both of us have that story in our sacred tradition. So I talked about how this is about a shared history. But then I thought to myself, the only language that needs no translation is song. So I decided to end my presentation by singing something with Olam Chesed Yibaneh, which I sang in Hebrew and in English, and then the translator translated. So, and I got everybody singing the refrain with me because it has this ya la 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 ya la la la. So by the end of this song, which I sung several times, everybody around the table was singing, and it was really one of these moving moments. And afterward, everyone goes up to take a picture with the imam with the shofar, and so I go up there, and his translator comes up to him and says, the imam would like to have a word with you in private. And I was definitely scared. And I was like, okay. So I go over there, and he says to me in perfect English, because clearly he speaks English pretty well, but probably didn't want to have to feel like he had to say everything without the translator. But anyway, he said to me, he turned to me and goes, if Lady Gaga heard you sing, she'd have to retire. And I was like, oh, wow. I want that on my tombstone. But it was such a humanizing moment, and to me, it was about the power of music, that music is such a connector, and it was so powerful. So anyway, I will share one other thing if you're thinking about interfaith efforts. It kind of goes to something that you said about difference and defining yourself. I think sometimes you never understand your Jewishness as well as when you're just talking to somebody else of a different religion and trying to explain what Judaism is to them. So for that reason alone, I think interfaith work helps us be better Jews. But then I think there's no more important work right now when there's not just so much anti-Semitism, but so much misunderstanding of who Jews are, for us to be doing that work. And so I applaud that we're doing that work, and I hope that we can stand proudly as Jews for what we represent and who we are, and I think it's really important. Yeah. Okay, one more question, then we're going to go to oh, great.
What's your favorite Jewish song?
Oh my gosh. That's a great question. I don't know how I could possibly answer it. It'd be like picking my favorite child. Well, what I'd like to answer is say that the first Jewish song I fell in love with was Debbie Friedman's Sing Unto God, which I learned from Ruthie, who I talked about. Something about that, most Jews don't feel that comfortable with God. I loved God as a kid. I still love God, just in case you're wondering. But I used to sing to God all the time. I would sing to God on my swing set. I would just sing songs to God. But anyway, this song was oh my gosh, there's a song that is speaking my language, and it was so joyful, and it was a rock beat. It goes sing unto God, sing a new song, oh sing praises to God, give thanks to God with a song, oh sing praises unto the Lord thy God. So in some ways, the language is now so dated. It was 40 years old. But that song I loved, and I used to sing it all the time with my sister in the car. And anyway, so that was probably my favorite first song that I fell in love with. Now, I don't even know how I could choose. I have so many. I think my favorite song is whatever I'm singing in the moment. That's a very nice place to end. I'm going to be at the dessert reception if you want to, say hello, or if I didn't get to, answer a question, but I just want to say that a few of you actually in different ways said something like, we feel like we get to take a little credit because I taught you or I did this thing with you or whatever it was. I just want to say that I think you all get credit. I think that this community was a very beautiful community to grow up in. I feel deeply fortunate that I was here. I think I look at my Aunt Sandy, who like hosted all my Passover Seders and decorated my Hanukkah. And I see Tova Achdut, who was my next religious school director after Joan, and amazing. I mean, I could go around this room, but it was filled with people who really put their heart and soul into this community. And I hope that it continues and flourishes, that you support your leadership to make this community the community that you want to be. And like I learned, each one of us has to do our part, and that will make us not only the Jewish community we want to be, but hopefully the people we want to be in the world. So thank you again for having me. Oh, thank you. All right, let's go get some dessert.